In the kingdom of Gransreich, inside the royal palace there exists a long-standing custom, which is to hire a royal tutor to educate the princes in preparation for the throne. Those chosen to be tutors are all elites, brilliant talents sought throughout the entire kingdom. The tutor entrusted by the king is named Hain. The king has 6 children, including 1 princess and 5 princes. Although it has been decided that the successor to the throne will be the eldest son, unforeseen misfortunes could occur in the future. And so the king wants Hain to tutor the younger siblings, to develop them and prepare them to be ready to inherit should anything happen. The carriage carrying the royal tutor arrived at the capital. Hain stepped down full of presence and pride. It seemed the king had chosen someone trustworthy, but the 2 gate guards did not quite believe it because of his height. Even though Hain tried to introduce himself, they still thought he was the son of the royal tutor. Fortunately, the queen appeared, otherwise who knew how long the 2 young men would have kept patting his head. After that, she briefly introduced Hain to the princes. She could not understand why the previous tutors gave up so soon, even though she saw the princes as obedient. Regardless, whether they were obedient or troublesome, Hain was determined to complete this duty. Then she led him to the prince's chamber. When the door opened, he stepped inside and introduced himself to them. The princes appeared before him perfectly, as if stepping out of a painting. One of them extended his hand in welcome and spoke very politely, but that politeness lasted only 2 sentences. That prince immediately changed his attitude, speaking arrogantly, condescendingly, and not acknowledging Hain at all. His name was Leonhard, the 4th prince of the kingdom. Handsome on the outside, but once he opened his mouth, he was filled with arrogance and a pride as high as Mount Everest. Hain gave him the nickname Arrogant Everest Prince. While that one was talking, another prince suddenly rushed over, picked Hain up and played around. This one's name was Licht, the 5th prince. Hain never thought a member of the royal family could be so playful, so he called him the Playboy Prince. Seeing this, the 3rd prince came over to correct his younger brother and apologize to the tutor. His name was Bruno. He asked about Hain's education and background, but upon receiving the answer that Hain had never gone through any formal schooling, he immediately changed to a cold attitude. A knowledgeable prince. The last one was introduced by him, named Kai, the 2nd prince, who seemed quite frightening as he greeted Hain with a glare, then silently walked away without a word. Well, at least the introductions were done. Hain immediately moved to the main issue. He wanted to interview the princes. Interviewing each one would help him grasp their knowledge so he could arrange lessons. But the 4th prince immediately opposed this fiercely, because he hated tutors, claiming that Hain would be just like the former ones who would soon quit. Bruno also agreed, because he believed a tutor with no formal schooling could not possibly teach him. Licht followed the majority, while Kai did not express an opinion. Now Hain also understood why the previous tutors quit so early. The princes insulted them before discarding them. But so what? He did not care. What Hain wanted to know was who would be interviewed first. He had been entrusted with the responsibility of teaching them, so quitting midway was not an option. The 4th prince still would not give in, intending to persuade his brothers to convince the king to dismiss Hain, but was doused with cold water by Licht, who was the first to accept the interview. Bruno also did not want to argue, but he wanted to see what kind of tutor their father had specially invited. After that, Prince Kai also came close to Hain, mumbling words that were unclear but seemed like he was telling Hain to get lost, then quietly walked away. The 3 of them all left, leaving only Leonhard with Hain. In the end, Hain dragged him back to his room and interviewed him right there. The 4th prince, Leonhard, 15 years old, the most handsome young man on the continent with the nickname Lily of Gransreich. His character was described in documents Hain had found as humble and kind. But the reality was that he was an arrogant Everest prince. The purpose of this interview was both to learn more about his personality and to evaluate his learning ability. But the difficulty lay in how to get him to take the test. When Hain asked Leonhard why he hated teachers, the boy simply said he hated them just like carrots and bell peppers, suddenly dragging teachers into the category of food. After a round of questioning, Hain finally discovered part of the reason. No tutor had ever truly paid attention to him. Up until now, they had only cared about the king's mood, and most importantly, he hated studying while tutors forced him to study, so tutors were like enemies. Therefore, the only thing he had learned from tutors was running, sometimes running on foot, sometimes on horseback. Thanks to countless escapes, he had won many trophies, especially in athletics. With this situation, Hein wondered if giving him a test would only make him run. And exactly as predicted, as soon as Hein held up the test questions, Leonhard pulled up his trousers and ran. But what was more surprising was that Hein could keep up with his speed. Although the main door was blocked, there was still the window. Leonhard tried to escape through it, but accidentally dropped his diary. Hein quickly picked it up and crawled under a bench to read it. After reading a few lines, Hein realized the diary was completely negative. Even trivial matters caused Leonhard to collapse into despair and disappointment. When Hein crawled out and asked him about it, Leonhard denied it, claiming it was Licht's diary, so Hein returned it to him. At that moment Leonhard finally admitted it was his. With this weakness in hand, Hein immediately used it to force him to take the test. In the end, Leonhard reluctantly but seriously completed it and filled in all the answers. After receiving the results, Hein told Leonhard to meet him at 4 p.m. for their first lesson, then left the room. Leonhard was still sulking, thinking of how to ask his father to dismiss Hein, when suddenly he heard the sound of the door opening. He thought Hein had returned to beg him to attend at 4, but it turned out to be a maid bringing pastries. It was Hein who had arranged to have them delivered as a reward for him. So Leonhard gave up telling the king, but still had not accepted this tutor. Now it was the next prince's turn, the wise Prince Bruno. The third prince, Bruno, 16 years old, had since childhood been praised as a prodigy with extraordinary knowledge. He was able to lecture in many fields and was considered a promising young scholar. These were the details Hein had gathered. Entering his room, Hein was a little surprised to see it filled with many kinds of books. But the important matter was how to get him to take the test. Unexpectedly, as soon as Hein presented it, Bruno accepted and completed it immediately in just an instant. Not only that, but he also wanted to test Hein's own knowledge and ability. Until now, every tutor had been inferior to Bruno. If Hein could not prove himself, then he would be dismissed. Hein thought carefully. Accepting the challenge was not a good idea, but suddenly Bruno commented that he never expected a royal tutor to be so small. Every time Hein heard the word small, he felt offended. He accepted the test right away. The first challenge Bruno proposed was a game of chess. From a chess match one could see many things about an opponent. Bruno, with his 100% win rate, was extremely confident. But with just a few simple moves, Hein checkmated him. Bruno was left dumbfounded, unable to believe it. He continued with mental arithmetic again. He lost. Switching to music, Hein could replace an entire orchestra. In cards, he lost miserably again. Bruno became shaken and could hardly believe it. Finally, he pulled out what he was most confident in: knowledge. 100 difficult questions from many different fields, written randomly in 5 languages. But before he could finish explaining, Hein had already handed in the answers, even correcting spelling mistakes. The result drove Bruno to despair. Since childhood, he had buried himself in study to stand out, and now he was defeated by a genius, leaving him confused. At that moment, Hein noticed Bruno's research paper and asked to read it. After going through it, he acknowledged it and even gave advice to improve it. Seeing his hard work understood and recognized, even receiving constructive suggestions, Bruno became excited, collapsed to the ground, and called Hein master with eyes full of admiration. From now on, Hein is the person he respects most. It turned out Bruno's desire to test him was simply to find someone better who could teach him what he didn't know. But the whole thing about calling him master felt a bit strange. Hein refused, but Bruno stubbornly insisted on calling him that. Luckily at that moment Licht burst in, asking if Hein had finished the interviews, and then practically carried him off. If Licht hadn't shown up, Hein wouldn't have known how to escape. That finished 2 of them. Next was Prince Licht. According to investigative information, Licht is the 5th prince, 14 years old, a handsome young man with a cheerful personality, very close to nobles from other countries. He often sneaks into town and stands out among the populace, especially women. He could be called extremely extroverted. Finally, they arrived at his room. Hein seemed a little stunned by being carried upside down like that. Licht opened the door and introduced Hein to everyone. Turns out they were his girlfriends, but being mistaken for a child isn't always a bad thing. When Licht said there was a small royal tutor, these girls were very eager to meet Hein, but only for a moment because Hein still had to interview Licht. Though a bit reluctant, they left to give the two of them some privacy. After all, it wasn't just Hein. Licht also had personal things to ask. Hein thought it would be about studies or his background, but what Licht was curious about was Hein's body parts. Being that curious and only getting slapped once in the face was fortunate. After that, Hein gave him the test, but Licht wouldn't concentrate and kept chattering nonsense. Hein reminded him to focus seriously, but Licht had already finished long ago. Then, just as Hein was about to go interview the last prince, Licht called him back to ask a question. If it had been the same sort of question as before, Hein would have refused. But Licht's question was, who is Hein, really? Other tutors were famous with grand titles, but Hein alone was extremely mysterious in terms of information. At that moment, Licht's gaze became incredibly sharp and penetrating, but the next second he returned to his usual playful demeanor. Licht's girlfriends poked their heads in to ask if the interview was finished. Seeing the two of them looking tense, they were told they were only discussing serious matters, so there was nothing to worry about. Hein arranged to meet Licht in the Great Hall at 4 p.m., then left. After Hein had gone a short distance, Licht opened the door again to watch, and Hein became wary he had been complacent with him. 3 princes were done. Now only the second prince, Kai, remained. 17 years old, a quiet person who rarely appears in crowds. After a period of fighting at the military academy, he was suspended, a figure known for a fierce temper. After knocking on the door for a while with no answer, Hein asked a passing maid and learned the prince had gone out and wasn't in the room. He then asked her about Prince Kai, but the maid didn't seem able to communicate much and knew nothing. The rumor that he was a frightening person seemed to be true. The situation felt a bit dangerous since there was only an hour left until the appointed time, and they needed to find Prince Kai quickly. Rushing to look for him, Hein encountered the palace dog that had stolen a book. While chasing it, he saw someone lying on the ground. Thinking it was a crime scene inside the palace, it turned out to be Prince Kai asleep. Hein recalled that earlier the prince had told him to get lost. While he was thinking, Kai suddenly woke and lifted Hein up. Turns out he had mistaken Hein for the dog. Well, at least he considered Hein the new teacher, and it seemed he didn't need to be too cautious with him. From the way Kai spoke, Hein became a little suspicious of the information in those documents. Turning, Hein saw Kai glaring. It wasn't that Kai had deliberately aimed to be scary, but that his gaze had always been sharp. He had seemed frightening, but in reality he was very gentle. The Get Lost said that morning had actually meant he wanted help. Because he spoke softly, Hein had misread his mouth. While Kai was taking the test, a little girl came in. She was the youngest princess, named Adele. When Kai spoke about his sister, his expression softened. He confided in Hein that he cherished him, because among the tutors Hein was the first to speak to him, and that he would rely on Hein for his and his siblings' studies in the future. After handing in the test, he immediately fell asleep, a mature and gentle person completely different from the rumors. Instead of listening to such information, it would be more correct to feel it for oneself. Hein also received a new lesson useful for his royal tutoring work. In the Great Hall, Hein had finished grading 4 test papers, with 10 minutes left before the appointment time. He wondered if they would come. At this moment, Leonhard was sitting alone on a swing, thinking that if no one came, Hein would give up. Suddenly, Bruno ran past, saw him, and called him to go study together. Leonhard was surprised, since at first Bruno had opposed vehemently, yet now he respected the new tutor. However, having just broadened his horizons, Bruno had completely changed his attitude, becoming very respectful toward Hein. The more he heard, the more irritated Leonhard became, so he hurriedly ran away, leaving Bruno behind. With 3 minutes left until 4 o'clock, Bruno pushed the door open hastily and apologized for being late. It turned out he believed coming 10 minutes early to prepare was very necessary. Hein told him that coming at any time was fine, just not to call him master in front of the princes, otherwise it would be very embarrassing. The next to arrive was Prince Licht. He pushed the door open and called Hein's name in a familiar manner, which made Bruno irritated and jealous to the point of anger, while Hein found it normal since the prince's status was higher than his, so addressing him that way was not a problem. However, it should not be overly familiar. Just the matter of how to address the teacher was enough to make Bruno and Licht argue noisily. With 2 minutes left, Prince Kai arrived. The other two still ignored him and argued even more fiercely. It was only when Kai stepped in between them and glared once that both fell silent. Then he loudly said both were good boys, making the two take the initiative to apologize. It turned out he was the mediator among the brothers. He wanted everyone to be close to each other. Although his appearance seemed a little scary, inside he was extremely pure, making the younger brothers unable to refute. Finally, the clock struck 4, and only the fourth prince, Leonhard, had not come. Licht suggested that the group study without Leonhard, but since it was the first group lesson, no one should be missing, so they postponed it to another day. Bruno could not bear to waste it, so he hurriedly went to find him. As soon as he opened the door, he saw Leonhard hiding behind it. Leonhard said he came only to see Hain's failure when Kai and Licht did not come. But unexpectedly, those two were now completely close to Hain. The reasons were quite odd. Licht's female friends liked Hain, while Kai thought the new tutor was small, soft, and cute. Now that all four had arrived, Hain intended to begin the lesson. Seeing this, Leonhard tried to run away but was held back by Licht. The first thing Hain did was return the graded tests. First was Bruno with a perfect score, then Kai with 87 points, Licht with 60 points, and finally Leonhard with 1 point. This shocked everyone. Bruno could not believe it, so he borrowed the test to check. Maybe the answers were filled in the wrong places. No. Maybe he was tired. No. Maybe it was due to little time. No, they all had the same amount of time. In fact, Leonhard took the longest. He got only 1 point for writing his name correctly. This made Licht laugh endlessly, but even if Licht had not laughed, everyone was speechless at Leonhard. Fortunately, Kai was considerate enough to comfort him. Although his head was a little dull, at least his limbs were well developed. After much comforting, suddenly Hain said this score was terrifying, which made Leonhard angry and sulky, dashing away. At that speed, there was no stopping him. But the important matter now was why Leonhard hated studying so much. It turned out that from long ago, he hated not only studying but also teachers. Back then, his first tutor had been extremely strict. Because he could not learn as quickly as his brothers, that tutor focused on him, creating a terrible pressure that left a deep wound in Leonhard's heart. Therefore, he grew to hate teachers and saw them as enemies. After hearing this story, Hain realized he needed to act immediately to change him. He would prove he was not his enemy. Then Hain walked toward the window, without a word flung it open wide and jumped out even though this was the 3rd floor. The scene was very cool, but Bruno's shout of "Master" ruined the coolness. Meanwhile, Leonhard was thinking that only running away could make him feel at ease. Thinking about it, no tutor had ever managed to catch up with him. Just then, he heard someone calling "Prince" from behind. Turning around, he was scared stiff when he saw Hain standing there riding a horse. It turned out that because Hain's legs were too short to reach the stirrups, he had an embarrassing posture like that. Hain asked Leonhard if he could stop the horse so they could talk, but riding in such a way was terrifying. Who would dare stop? With no other choice, Hain jumped across, hugged Leonhard, and the two fell into a bush. One would think Leonhard had fainted in fear, but in fact he was just gaping in astonishment that someone riding a horse for the first time had actually caught up with him. At this moment, Hain finally had the time and chance to explain the earlier matter. In truth, he had not meant to criticize Leonhard, but only wanted to talk, to find a suitable method to teach each individual, and to tell him not to be discouraged because of today's test. Everyone has their own weakness, and only those who recognize their weakness can become stronger. Hearing those words, Leonhard gradually opened his heart and accepted this new tutor. But a more important issue now was how to get back. The road was quite far, and if they walked it might take several hours. Meanwhile, back at the royal palace, everyone was terribly worried because they could not find the tutor and the prince. Bruno, impatient, tried to go search by himself, but was stopped by the guards. Luckily, the two were found before dawn. Returning to the palace, Hain was led by a maid to the room provided for his rest, a room far too large for a commoner. The bed was also huge, making it hard for him to sleep, and as he tossed and turned he rolled right into the gap beside the bed. In the morning, the maid came to wake him, and was startled not to see him on the bed, but stuck in the gap the whole night. When Hain went to the Great Hall to begin teaching, he was surprised to see Leonhard already sitting there. It turned out Leonhard wanted to try to fulfill the promises of yesterday by studying. While he was working on his exercises, the other 3 princes arrived, and as usual Bruno and Licht were quarreling noisily. It seemed Haynes' upcoming tutoring job would be quite tough. Today, instead of studying at home, the whole group would have a practical experience by going to the capital to learn about the lives of commoners. Hearing about going downtown, Licht looked extremely excited. He just wanted to go out and play quickly. The city's situation was normal recently, so the trip would be safe. Hearing that, Kai and Bruno seemed reassured. But as always, trouble came from Leonhard. He refused to go downtown, asking why royalty needed to understand commoners' lives. So Hein took action, telling him a historical story from 200 years ago about a princess who ignored the people's lives and lived in luxury, making the citizens so angry that they rose up and put her in the guillotine. There was even an illustration. Hearing that, Leonhard was terrified and agreed to go along, as long as he would not be put into a guillotine. After that, Hein set an appointment with everyone in the courtyard at 10 o'clock. Since their identities needed to be hidden, he wanted everyone to dress so as not to be recognized. But after 10 o'clock, still no one had shown up. Just then, Licht appeared first. Being familiar with going downtown, the clothes he wore looked very fitting. After that, the other three came out. Fortunately, they were all dressed normally. Bruno thought they still needed to cover their faces. Luckily, Licht had the experience to warn them, otherwise all three would have gone with suspicious masks. After everyone was ready to leave, their grandmother came out crying and giving warnings as if they were going very far away. After traveling some distance, Hein had the group stop at a random alley, and from there they would go on foot. Since it was their first time downtown, everyone still felt unfamiliar except for Licht. Bruno even brought a map to check directions. Now Hein would begin assigning tasks for each person. He turned around and saw Licht whispering something to Kai. Then the whole group started strolling. Bruno clung tightly to the map, trying to memorize it and compare it with the scenery. Licht mocked him as an amateur, then volunteered to go first to lead the way. But the farther he walked, the more bewildered he became. It turned out that every time Licht went downtown, it was always his girlfriends who led and guided him, so now he had no idea where he was going. Moreover, this place was quite crowded. It was the Ring Road, the main street of the capital, and both the theater and the city hall were located right here. Thanks to such facilities, the city had a population of about 1,300,000. Therefore, they must not separate, especially Leonhard. It seemed Hein's story had really frightened him, so Hein held his hand to prove that as long as they did not reveal their identity, they would be safe. But while he was leading Leonhard, he saw Licht whispering something to Bruno, and when they arrived at the shopping district, Hein suggested everyone split up to shop. Kai and Bruno quickly separated to the places they wanted, while Leonhard awkwardly admitted he had never shopped before. Seeing that, the two of them took him to a department store. Licht whispered something again in front of Hein. Then, entering the store, Leonhard looked around and chose something he liked. His taste was truly terrible. He picked an ugly doll and even praised it as cute, completely incomprehensible. When it came time to pay, upon hearing the price of 55 cents, the boy, not knowing the denominations of money, just handed everything over. So Hein had to give a lesson right there. Luckily, Leonhard was royalty, or else he would have starved long ago. And fortunately, the staff they encountered were kind, otherwise there would have been nothing left. After that, Licht said he had some personal business and dragged Leonhard away. It seemed the princes were plotting something. Bruno was still absorbed in the bookstore, as if he wanted to buy the entire shop. Hein reminded him to choose just one book he really needed. Luckily, they met a kind shopkeeper who marked the books Bruno had chosen so he could buy them next time he came. Then the two went to meet Prince Kai. He said to go to the square, and upon arriving they were surprised to see many pigeons perched all over him. It turned out the boy had spent all his money buying food for the birds. Then Kai asked Hein if he wanted to feed them. As soon as Hein threw out food, the pigeons swarmed to eat, and then they even tried to lift him away. Luckily, Kai pulled him back, otherwise they would have lost a tutor. Suddenly, Licht called them over and pointed at a sausage stand, saying he wanted to eat. The group felt awkward not knowing how to eat it, so Hein demonstrated how commoners ate. Even with guidance, Bruno and Leonhard still looked stiff, while Kai and Licht ate heartily. As evening approached and they were preparing to return to the palace, an unexpected event occurred. A lazy thief snatched an old woman's bag and pushed her down. That made the princes angry. Yet the old woman only worried that her beloved grandchild was unharmed. Seeing the grandmother's concern for her grandchild reminded them of their grandmother the queen, which awakened a sense of justice in Leonhard. He intended to use his speed to chase the thief and make him pay, but Kai held him back. While everyone was still worried about the old woman, Kai had already chased down the thief and retrieved the bag. That made Leonhard feel embarrassed. Very quickly, the thief was arrested by the police and taken away. The old woman came to thank Kai with a bag of candy for helping her recover the purse. Leonhard also received a bag from her. Though he shyly said he had not helped at all, his brave act of standing up for a stranger was very praiseworthy. On the way back, Hein asked what they had learned, but all the answers were ordinary, showing they had not grasped the true lesson. What they should have seen was the smiles of the people here. Although bad people existed in a society of 1,300,000, there were 1,300,000 ways of life and personalities, and King Victor, their father, had worked so hard to preserve those smiles. If they became king in the future, they too must strive like him. Hein then noticed a strange bag beside them and asked what it was, but the group hid it and refused to say, as if they still had not completely accepted him. That evening, as Hein went for a walk to clear his mind, Leonhard suddenly carried him off somewhere. Knowing for sure they were about to play some trick, Hein poked his head in and said that whatever it was, he would not be surprised. But he really was surprised. The princes had prepared a welcome party for him, with the gifts they had bought that day. That night, Hein slept very well together with the presents he had been given. One night, while Hein was preparing lessons for the next day's class, he suddenly heard a loud commotion outside. A moment later, someone knocked on the door, saying that His Majesty, after being absent for half a year and now returning, very much wished to meet Hein and the princes. Early the next morning, Hein was escorted to the king's place. For some reason, he felt restless and anxious, and this uneasy feeling was shared not only by Hein but also by the princes. Although the princes all deeply respected their father, they also felt immense pressure. Only Kai was excited to meet the king, for his heart was as vast as the cosmos, the galaxy itself, so it was no surprise that their relationship was unlike an ordinary father and son. After the formal and ceremonial royal greetings, the king unexpectedly burst into tears. It turned out that the princes felt awkward because their father was so warm and emotional, which made them not really want to meet him much. So the god of war in legend was just like an ordinary father after all. Seeing his sons in harmony with their new tutor made him very happy. But the father mode was over, and now he would speak to them as the king. After reviewing the reports and test results of his children, he pointed out each one's shortcomings. The one who troubled him most was Leonhard. Yet Leonhard himself had forgotten what it was that troubled his father. It was that test with a score of 1 point. If things continued like this, his ascension to the throne would only be a pipe dream. Therefore, the king demanded that Leonhard retake the test and score at least 60 points, otherwise he would lose the right to inherit the throne. Normally, everyone was equal, but this was a special case, so he entrusted Hein to personally tutor Leonhard for 3 days, after which he would be retested. This shocked Leonhard greatly. He was not too concerned about becoming king, but what crushed him was that he had disappointed his father. Yet most of the blame lay with him, for he had driven away all the tutors before. But now things were different. He had a special genius tutor, not to mention his supportive brothers, all ready to help him improve. So everyone got to work immediately. The first step was to determine his level. Surely, he must at least know what 1 + 1 was, right? But in reality, he did not even know the most basic of basic calculations. This left everyone completely stunned, as if there were no hope. They told him to think again, and he answered 11. The more Leonhard spoke, the more speechless everyone became. They told him to use his fingers to count, and thanks to that, he finally realized the answer was 2. But when trying a slightly larger sum, he froze again, not knowing to use the other hand. Kai then came up with a clever idea: combine something Leonhard hated with something he liked, specifically having him study while running. This sounded more like a punishment. Then they tried asking someone Leonhard admired to teach him. That person was Bruno. But as he listened to his older brother's lecture, his eyes sparkled and glued themselves to him, while his ears let not a single word in. This was hopeless. Out of options, they resorted to cheating, giving Leonhard the exact same test as before, so he only needed to memorize the answers. But did Licht really believe his brother could memorize all 50 answers in order? In the end, it still came down to Hein. He combined food with math problems, and Leonhard could solve them smoothly. Thus, they had found a way for him to study, though it was still extremely difficult. Time passed quickly, and Leonhard's ability reached only 15 points, still far from the required 60. Could he possibly turn things around when the test was tomorrow? Leonhard wanted to give up, but thinking positively, if he had managed 15 points this time, then he had discovered 85 mistakes, and next time he could do better. These words strongly moved Leonhard, giving him renewed spirit. That was good, but it was time to sleep. Studying should not harm one's health. The next morning, before the exam, he was still studying, trying to seize every moment. At last, the test time arrived. Leonhard was ready to face it alone. His 3 brothers silently cheered him on, and even Hein, deep in his heart, encouraged him. After the test time ended, Hein graded the paper immediately. The result was truly surprising. Leonhard had scored 59 points. Everyone was overjoyed and congratulated him, but they forgot that the requirement was 60. So, to keep the promise, he still lost his right to inherit the throne. However, something special always happens at the last moment. Hein had misgraded one spot. The paper should have received 1 more point because Leonhard had correctly written the name in Hein's unique grading style. Thus, luck still smiled on Leonhard, and he was accepted by the king. From then on, Leonhard also truly accepted this talented tutor. He extended his hand for a handshake, and Hein responded with the same kind of casual handshake Leonhard had once given. Hein thought that if he shook too warmly and affectionately, the little prince would just burst into tears again. This made Leonhard embarrassed and angry. That night, Hein came to meet King Victor with a bottle of wine. It was clear the two had known each other long ago, yet pretended to be meeting for the first time, saying they had only ever corresponded by letter. It made sense, because for Hein to become the tutor, Victor had to accept one condition: to keep Hein's past a secret. If it were revealed, Hein would vanish without a trace. One day, while walking through town to shop, Hein suddenly stopped in front of a cafe. Not thinking much, perhaps led by fate, he went inside. The server who greeted him startled Hein. It was none other than the 5th Prince, Licht. But the staff member quickly denied it, claiming it was a mistake, saying he often got confused for the prince because of his resemblance. His serious, professional way of speaking and working was also completely unlike the 5th Prince's playboy personality. After introducing the menu and helping Hein order, the staff member went in to inform the kitchen. But in truth, he really was Prince Licht. He feared that if people discovered this, they would mock him, saying he was not cool at all. Not to mention, a royal working as a waiter. If the king found out, he would definitely lose his right to the throne. But never mind, he just had to carry on as usual, adding a bit of acting to deceive Hein into leaving quickly. However, he got too caught up in his role and forgot that Hein was staring at him closely. He asked the owner if someone else could serve Hein, but the cafe's rule was that once a server attended to a customer, they had to serve them fully from start to finish. So Licht had no choice but to endure a little, thinking Hein would leave soon. Unexpectedly, Hein even pulled out a book to read, which felt like torture to Licht. At that moment, a small scuffle broke out between 2 young men, nearly injuring a girl sitting nearby. Luckily, Licht stepped in, rescuing the girl and showing his gentlemanly side. Then, taking on the role of a mediator, he calmed the 2 quarreling men. With a few professional gestures and words, he resolved both problems at once, drawing the attention of the entire cafe. Even Hein praised him. Licht thought he had managed to deceive Hein, but out of nowhere, a letter from Hein fell into his hands. That was the end. Worse still, not only Hein but also his father found out and demanded a meeting. The situation grew more and more serious. Hein could not simply stand by and watch things spiral, so he decided to intervene. The conversation between father and son was tense. Hein spoke up in defense of Licht, pointing out that his actions were serious and not at all frivolous. But the reason he worked as a waiter did indeed come from playfulness, because girls liked being served by a handsome waiter. At first, it had been extremely difficult and chaotic, but thanks to the kind and enthusiastic help of others, combined with his own effort, Licht had grown into who he was today. Because of that, he firmly refused to give up the job. King Victor insisted that, as a prince, such work was dangerous to his safety. Hearing this, Licht grew furious, believing his father cared only about the royal bloodline, not about him or his wishes. It had been the same in childhood when he suffered a high fever. His father never came to visit or ask after him. And now he acted concerned, pretending to be a good father, but what he truly cared about was only the family's reputation. Saying this, Licht stormed off in anger, convinced that his father would never understand him. The cafe was his only emotional support. Just as Licht was about to step back into the cafe, King Victor suddenly appeared, galloping in with Hein on horseback. Seeing his stubborn son refusing to listen, the king intended to go straight to the owner. Licht feared his father would use their father-son relationship to pressure the owner into firing him. But what came next left both Hein and Licht stunned. Victor actually asked to work a shift at the cafe. Despite both Hein and Licht trying to stop him, the king refused to listen and persistently persuaded the owner. Since there were still 5 hours left before closing, the owner agreed to let him try. This left Licht completely dumbfounded, the king working as a waiter. Licht himself had struggled and fumbled for days before becoming decent at the job, so surely his father would be fired quickly. But Licht forgot where he and his brothers had inherited their looks from. Though aged, Victor still radiated an irresistible charm in the cafe uniform, captivating all the women. Hein was left speechless, having nothing more to say to this king. As for Licht, the manager assigned him to train his own father. Having just argued bitterly with him earlier that day, now being forced to guide him left Licht flustered and unsure what to say. He thought there was no way Victor could become professional in just one evening. Soon a female customer requested service perfect for practice. Victor strode over, dropped to one knee before her, and spoke in sweet, charming words. Who could resist that? The woman fell head over heels for the king with 6 children. But that was just the beginning. Many more guests needed attention. A foreign customer asked questions that none of the staff could understand, but Victor stepped in, showing off his mastery of foreign languages, leaving his son gaping in shock. Impressive indeed, though Licht still clung proudly to his own reputation as a lady killer. Yet here was his father outshining him, winning over every person in the cafe, young or old, male or female, all utterly smitten. Only here did Licht glimpse a new side of his father, not the overworked ruler, not the emotional man who cried when seeing his sons, but a perfect gentleman, sociable, refined, and elegant. And likewise, Victor also discovered new sides of Licht, things his son never showed inside the palace. After the shift, all the staff, even the owner, begged Victor to stay on, saying his presence had made the evening delightful for every customer. But he instead pulled Licht outside for a private talk. There, he apologized for not truly understanding him. All along, what he worried about was not the royal family's honor, but Licht's life and health. Licht, in turn, regretted not seeing his father clearly. Even when buried in affairs of state, Victor had still come to check on him while he slept. Clearly, no father could fail to love his child. It was only that they had misunderstood how he expressed it. So Licht decided to quit his job at the cafe. Hein, silent until now, finally spoke. This cafe had greatly boosted his own work efficiency, and so he would continue to come here daily. Thus Victor need not worry about Licht's safety, since Hein would personally guarantee it. Hearing this, Victor agreed. From then on, Hein no longer saw Licht as a mysterious prince, but simply as a sharp and lively boy. A few days later, Hein gathered the 4 princes together to discuss a hypothetical scenario. He posed a situation. Suppose a jewelry shop was struggling and had to borrow money from the state. How should it be handled? Licht instantly answered that the state should just lend them the money. But his idea was immediately rejected, since the law clearly forbids the state from lending to individuals. Then Leonhard spoke up, suggesting they could call on citizens for help, each contributing a small amount until the full sum was collected. Though the idea wasn't entirely convincing, King Victor actually found it quite interesting. He even wanted to present it before the council, and so he asked Leonhard to write a detailed report for discussion. When Leonhard was praised, Bruno felt a pang of envy. Ever since he was young, he had always admired his father and longed to become a king like him. However, many believed that their eldest brother was the one truly worthy of inheriting the throne. To explain a bit, this family had 6 brothers. So far, 5 were known, and the eldest seemed to be talented enough not to require tutoring. Wanting to surpass his eldest brother, Bruno threw himself into studying. But now, he found himself jealous of Leonhard, worried that his younger brother might also be a genius like the eldest. Seeing Bruno troubled, Hein approached him to talk, but Bruno only shook his head, saying there was nothing worth worrying about. Not wanting to press further, Hein shifted the conversation to Bruno's upcoming thesis presentation at a university. Since it was a rather difficult topic, Bruno sought Hein's opinion and advice. After reviewing it, Hein commented that Bruno's thesis looked like a mere copy of a previous presentation, lacking any originality. What displeased him most were the numerous spelling mistakes scattered throughout, which he carefully marked. Hein believed Bruno was burdened by something, but since the boy wouldn't speak up, he chose not to force him. In the end, Hein gave Bruno a challenge to write a dissertation about the changes he wished to bring to the country, and if he failed to produce a proper one within 2 weeks, Hein would no longer consider him his pupil. That challenge became a powerful motivation, lifting Bruno's spirits. From then on, he shut himself in his room, working tirelessly on the dissertation. Whenever unsatisfied, he tossed aside the old draft and started anew. Night after night, he labored until he collapsed asleep at his desk from exhaustion. When the day came, Leonhard submitted his report to their father, while Bruno gave his to Hein. Bruno's exhausted face alone showed how hard he had worked, and the result exceeded Hein's expectations. He found Bruno truly worthy of being his pupil, and with this dissertation, Bruno could confidently present at the university. Bruno went to the university and began his presentation. He didn't want to disappoint Hein. When it ended, he felt a little disheartened seeing no immediate reaction, but then the audience burst into applause, restoring his self-confidence greatly. Someone even invited him to present at their school afterward. At that moment, Bruno's third idol appeared, the professor himself. Impressed by the presentation, he invited Bruno to a meal, where he suggested that Bruno abandon the throne and join him in becoming a scholar. Meanwhile, Hein waited for Bruno to return, and when he saw the carriage bring him back, a count appeared as well. This man introduced himself as Rosen, aide to the first prince. Rosen informed Hein about Bruno's meeting that evening. Bruno, still conflicted by the professor's offer, heard him bluntly say that his chances of inheriting the throne were nearly zero, since the eldest brother was clearly the most promising. Before leaving, the professor gave Bruno 1 week to give a decisive answer. Inside, Bruno remained hesitant, for he always yearned to be a king like his father. Yet, when he happened to overhear Victor lavishly praising Leonhard's report, Bruno felt even more disheartened, losing all confidence. For a whole week, he sank into self-doubt, unable to decide. One day, Hein happened upon Bruno while he was out walking a dog, or at least something that didn't quite look like one. Hearing Bruno pour out his worries, Hein gently said that becoming a scholar was not something lesser. Hein knew he had no right to decide the future for the 4 princes, but he still hoped Bruno would think carefully, because if not, then one day, when old age and illness struck, he might end up bedridden, regretting the choices he had made. After many days of thought, Bruno finally found clarity and discovered his own answer. He went to meet the professor and expressed that he would attend his school, but not right away. Bruno wanted to wait until he was truly mature and more seasoned before pursuing the academic path. After all, his greatest dream was still to become a king like his father, and he would not give up on that dream, no matter how slim the chance might be. Hearing this, the professor smiled, showing understanding and respect for Bruno's determination. He gladly accepted the answer, and even said that Bruno could visit him anytime he wished. After that, the professor departed, leaving a quiet space behind, and at that very moment, Hein appeared. He looked at Bruno with deep admiration, for that unwavering resolve strengthened his trust in him. Hein expressed his desire to stand by Bruno's side, walking with him toward the goal of conquering the throne. However, the news that Bruno had not abandoned the throne soon reached Rosen's ears. Upon hearing this, he shifted his focus, deciding instead to eliminate Hein. From then on, Rosen ordered his subordinates to secretly gather information on him. One quiet night, Kai came to Hein seeking advice. Shortly after, Bruno and Leonhard also arrived one after another, each with something they wanted to ask. Seeing his 3 older brothers together, Licht refused to sit idly and followed in as well. He immediately raised a completely foolish question. If one had to choose between a beautiful girl with a flat body or a girl not so striking in looks, but with a full bust, who should be chosen? Hearing this, Bruno frowned and snapped that Licht had better go to sleep right away for the sake of protecting women in the world. Hein, however, paid no mind to such nonsense and quickly returned to what Kai wanted to say. Kai didn't hide anything and honestly admitted that Victor had asked him to train and improve his communication skills, yet he didn't know where to start. Indeed, all four princes had their own weaknesses. Licht was far too unserious, Bruno was still rather lacking in confidence to become king, Leonhard had no personality issues but was weak in arithmetic, and Kai's only obstacle lay in communication. Within the family, everything was fine, but with servants or guards it was a different story. For example, whenever passing by and being greeted by guards, Kai's cold gaze made them feel as if he wanted to attack them. And when dealing with servants, his stern expression looked as though he was scolding their work. Kai didn't say these things, but others easily misinterpreted his face. Afraid of making people avoid him, he often said nothing, and the more silent he was, the more frightened they became. The next morning, Hein would take Kai to practice communication. The following morning, the three princes brought Adele to meet Hein. The little girl sulked, saying she wanted to go to the zoo because the puppy at home had ruined her favorite painting. Hearing this, her three brothers felt awkward, since the zoo was rather far and they didn't want the trouble of going. But seeing their sister about to burst into tears, they gave in and decided to take Adele to cheer her up. Hein thought it was also a good idea, especially since the trip could be a good opportunity for Kai to train his communication skills. The first thing Hein said was to practice making Kai smile. He tried to demonstrate but was too stiff, to the point that Leonhard had to step in and do it instead. When they reached the zoo, Hein instructed that if Kai saw an animal he found interesting, he should try smiling. But when Kai truly smiled, his face actually looked more dangerous than usual, leaving everyone a bit unsettled. The group continued sightseeing, first the ostrich pen, then the bear area. Leonhard had thought bears would be cute like stuffed animals, but reality was the complete opposite. Seeing them, Adele became frightened, and so Kai had to gently comfort his sister to reassure her. After that, the whole group went on to the feeding area. Everyone was surrounded by animals, except for Bruno and Hein, who received little attention. Meanwhile, Kai was completely surrounded by a flock of sheep, looking both pitiful and amusing. Hein took the chance to tell Kai to go ask the nearby staff for more food. Kai, sweating heavily, walked over but didn't dare to speak, then came back again, still unable to open his mouth. Just then, Adele cried out because a rabbit had bitten her, causing the group to immediately take her home. After that incident, Adele made peace with the puppy in the house, realizing she had overreacted and unfairly gotten angry at it. Now, back to Kai. Hein saw that Kai needed more training, so he advised him to start by communicating with people close in the palace, such as the maids. Licht immediately butted in, teaching Kai a few lines he usually used to flirt with girls. Though a bit ridiculous, Hein thought it could be worth a try, so Kai mustered all his courage and went to talk to two maids nearby. He confidently repeated the phrases he had just learned, but his usual stern gaze still scared them off, making them run away in fear. Not long after, Kai came across a maid struggling to carry a heavy tray. He immediately stepped in to help. From then on, Kai began assisting many others in the palace. However, because of his cold appearance and somewhat stiff manner, his kind actions were misunderstood by the guards. Feeling too exhausted from constantly frightening others, Kai decided to lie down on the grass to rest. At that moment, a maid quietly approached, gently placed a blanket over him, and even brought him a tray of tea. Yet, embarrassed, she quickly ran off. Hein came over and patiently explained that in truth, Kai had a good ability to read people, but out of fear of making others wary, he always avoided them. Hein advised that simply saying short phrases like hello or thank you would be seen as polite, and perhaps among those people, someone would truly understand his heart. Following that advice, Kai returned to his room. Just then, a maid came to change his sheets. Gathering all his courage, Kai timidly whispered thanks for her constant dedication in helping him. To his surprise, the maid smiled, no longer afraid like before, but instead showing affection toward him. Overjoyed, Kai immediately ran off to find Hein and his three brothers to share the good news, his face beaming brightly in a rare sight. Victor's aide then brought Adele's painting, now framed. The painting had been done by Hein himself. He noticed a burnt mark on the corner of the canvas and suspected that a candle had burned it. likely pushed by the dog rather than the dog intentionally ruining the painting. A few days later, when Kai's communication skills had somewhat improved enough that he could now flirt with girls without them running off in fear, he was summoned by Victor. Accompanied by Hein, they found Bruno already there. Victor wanted them all to discuss an incident that had just appeared in the newspaper. The article recalled an event from the previous year, when Kai and Bruno attended military school. According to it, the report accused the two of using violence to threaten teachers in order to get perfect grades without taking exams. Anyone who resisted would be beaten. It had become a nightmare for the school, ending only when Kai was discovered to have injured a fellow student seriously. The journalist further wrote that the entire matter had been covered up by the authorities, claiming that Kai and Bruno had in fact been suspended, while the injured student suffered even worse consequences, being expelled from school and pressured by the government. At this, Bruno immediately protested, insisting that everything written in the article was completely false. However, Victor calmly replied that he could not intervene, as the press had the right to free speech. Even so, the undeniable fact remained that Kai had indeed struck someone. Hein, silent until now, turned his gaze toward Kai and gently asked him to recount the entire truth behind the story. It was when both had just enrolled. Since Kai looked frightening, no one dared approach him. But he noticed that Bruno was often injured, always making excuses that it was from sword practice. One time, when Kai had been waiting too long, he went to look and discovered his younger brother being beaten. Unable to hold back his anger, Kai beat the other boy mercilessly, which led to his own suspension, while the other boy was expelled. Because the school would not accept Leonhard and Licht, Bruno also quit. Victor then submitted a complaint to the journalist and would wait for their reply. To think that even the king and princes were powerless, everything truly was in chaos. No wonder the four brothers now had to study under royal tutors. From that point onward, Kai was forced to get used to enduring gossip and slander from both inside and outside the palace. Victor instructed him to endure quietly for a time to avoid further disturbances. At the same moment, Hein happened to read another article, revealing that a criminal had infiltrated the palace. After leaving, Kai expressed his desire to directly meet again with the student from the incident to confront him. He made it clear that he was willing to endure whatever the other wanted to do to him, and would absolutely not retaliate with violence again. Hearing this, Hein decided to accompany him as an intermediary to ensure the meeting went smoothly. While preparing, the close servants were worried for Kai, but still trusted him wholeheartedly. In response, Kai forced a smile and thanked them. The smile itself was beautiful, but his cold, piercing eyes made anyone who looked feel a chill down their spine. Bruno immediately stepped in, reassuring everyone that it was the best smile Kai could manage, asking them to understand. At the meeting place, Hein and a soldier assigned to them went in first to complete the procedures. The student, upon hearing that Kai wanted to confront him over the article, hesitated briefly, but then agreed to the compromise. Hein immediately went out to call Kai, but at that very moment, the soldier who had gone with him was ambushed and dragged away by a group. When Kai and Hein returned, the boy calmly claimed that the soldier had gone in on his own earlier. Without suspicion, Kai and Hein went inside. Now seated together for a three-way conversation, the student explained his reasons for once attacking Bruno. He said there had been rumors spreading at the school that members of the royal family could do whatever they wanted, always receiving favoritism. Seeing Bruno frequently receive high marks, while teachers focused on tutoring the brothers and almost neglected the other students, jealousy and resentment had built up until it finally erupted into conflict. He wanted to apologize, and when Kai was about to shake his hand to reconcile, he suddenly pulled out a gun, and his men appeared to restrain them. Hein, Kai, and the remaining soldier were thrown into the wine cellar and tied up. This boy intended to use all three as hostages for ransom, daring to capture princes. He must have had a death wish. Since being expelled from school, his family had also disowned him. He wanted to take photos as proof to blackmail the king. Yet when he snapped the pictures, all three showed mocking, carefree expressions, revealing no trace of fear, which only enraged him further. He decided to threaten them to force fear out of them. But when he turned to threaten Kai, the boy's face remained calm as ever. However, the instant he turned to intimidate Hein, Kai immediately lost his composure, gathering strength to break the chains binding him. But remembering his promise to Hein not to resort to violence, he stopped himself and tried to suppress the fury in his heart. Seeing Kai not resist, the boy then attacked him. At once, Hain intercepted the strike. He had already freed himself from the flimsy chains long ago. Spinning around, he used the very chain to bind the boy tightly. Just when it seemed the matter was resolved and the three were about to leave, unexpectedly the boy's subordinates poured in from all sides. In the urgent situation, Hain turned to the soldier, asking him to protect Kai, while he himself stood ready to face them head-on. In that moment, Hain proved his true ability, not only excelling in knowledge and athletics, but his real combat skills were second to none. He moved swiftly and agilely, dodging every bullet, neutralizing every strike, not letting a single attack touch him. Hain alone took down all the enemies one after another. At that moment, the soldier who had been captured earlier returned with reinforcements, but there was nothing left for them to do. Everything had already been neatly dealt with by Hain. Calmly, he handed the task over, telling them to take all of the captives to the police for handling. Kai still spoke up and invited the boy to come to the palace as a guard to start his life anew, because he did not want to treat others too harshly and wanted to give them a chance to make amends. Kai valued his knowledge and ability, believing they would serve the country well. Hearing this, the boy felt somewhat relieved. A few days later, the article was corrected to reflect the truth. Hain happened to encounter Count Rosen, who wanted to know more about his past. When Hain refused to answer, Rosen immediately lifted him up and said he would take him back to the palace. On the way, Rosen laughed and remarked that since Hain's arrival, the princes had all changed for the better. But Hain knew full well that Rosen had been behind many things in the past, from inciting Licht to work outside, to using the professor to persuade Bruno to give up the throne. Only this latest incident involving Kai remained uncertain. Rosen instantly denied it, pretending he had no involvement, then steered the conversation toward the recent article about a criminal infiltrating the palace. Before they could argue further, the carriage had already arrived. As Hain stepped down, he saw Leonhard waiting. Just as he was about to speak, Rosen interrupted, revealing that he already knew Hain's true identity and that he had once been a teacher at a church. Rosen even asserted that upon digging deeper, he had discovered an interesting secret about Hain. Even so, Hain stayed calm, gently asking Leonhard to go inside first. But Leonhard refused to let it go. Provoked by Rosen's words, he decided to chase after Hain, determined to learn the truth. Realizing Leonhard was still following, Hain circled around to block his path and asked directly what he wanted to know. Leonhard stayed silent, gave no answer, then suddenly turned and ran. Hain immediately gave chase, determined not to let him leave in confusion. Leonhard wanted to know about Hain's past teaching at the church, and Hain confirmed it was true that he had volunteered there. Leonhard also wanted to hand in his own assignments for Hain to grade. Seeing Leonhard improve and no longer hate studying, Hain was pleased that he was growing more mature. Next was Bruno. He was teaching a few children along with Adele. When Hain arrived, Bruno admitted he hadn't known what to do with himself until Adele and the kids asked him to teach them. That day, the palace children swarmed Bruno, bombarding him with personal questions. What he usually did, whether he had a girlfriend, what food he liked most. Faced with the barrage, Bruno stayed silent and evasive, unwilling to reveal anything. The excited children quickly grew disappointed, their faces dropping in boredom. Seeing this, Hain reminded him that if he kept such a distance even from a few children, unable to guide them, then how could he one day lead an entire nation of subjects? Hearing this, Bruno nodded slightly, then gradually opened up, telling stories and chatting warmly with the children, bringing the lively atmosphere back. Next was Kai. He hesitantly confessed his true wish to return to military school. However, he had never dared say it to his father, knowing Victor would surely refuse. Still, Kai longed to go back, to start over and learn how to talk with others. Hain listened and advised that this was precisely the trial Kai had to overcome himself. If he truly wished to become king, then first he needed the courage to face Victor and persuade him personally, instead of relying on Hain. Finally came Licht. Hain took the initiative to visit the cafe where he was working. Observing for a while, he realized that through this job Licht had matured, gained a better understanding of society and the everyday lives of commoners. Hain praised and encouraged him to continue down that path, because it was a valuable experience. Licht smiled faintly at that, but inside he felt something odd, as if Hain's words hid a farewell. The next morning the four brothers gathered. The topic brought up was what Leonhard had heard from Rosen about Hayne's past. All four were curious but felt many points remained vague. Finally, they decided to sneak into Hayne's room to verify for themselves. Thinking Hayne surely would not be there, they nervously stood before the door, nodded to one another, and prepared to enter. It happened that Hayne was carrying a pile of books back as materials. Thus the four could enter outright instead of sneaking, and they were astonished at how messy his room was. Hearing his excuse that he'd been busy preparing lessons for them, the four brothers decided to clean the room for Hayne. Bruno proposed an elaborate plan, but it was too convoluted, so they agreed to tidy first and sort details later. Hayne asked the four not to touch his personal box. The brothers thought that box might reveal the mystery, so they tried to open it, but touching it would alert Hayne, so Leonhard had Hayne scratch his back as a distraction so Licht could open it. The moment they touched it, Hayne noticed. Licht said he was thirsty and asked Hayne to fetch water, but Hayne offered to brew tea right there. Leonhard asked him to get pastries, but Hayne told them all to leave him to work. Leonhard secretly opened the box before Hayne could stop him. Inside were items the four princes had given Hayne and letters from his former students. Everyone adored Hayne and wanted to be like him. Hayne believed all his students were precious to him, and the four princes were no different. Each had his own character and thus great value to Hayne. He felt honored to teach all four, and as punishment for snooping, he said he would prepare many extra assignments. The four princes continued helping each other clean the very cluttered room. Meanwhile, Hayne asked Kai to return some books to the library. Leonhard eagerly volunteered instead, grabbing the stack and happily running off. At that moment, a maid entered carrying a hot tray of tea and accidentally collided with Leonhard. The collision sent both tumbling and the tray spilled, causing a chain reaction that made the already messy room far worse. Seeing this, Hayne moved to help, but the four princes insisted they wanted to do it themselves and blocked him, saying this time they would handle it. They pushed Hayne back to his desk while they patiently cleaned. Hours passed into evening, and after much effort the room was finally tidy. Hayne then smiled and said he had prepared many homework assignments as a little gift for the four, joking aside. He had also brought tea and pastries as a small reward. While resting, they happened upon an old newspaper Hayne had kept. The article reported that a criminal had once slipped into the palace. Immediately the four burst into laughter, calling it nonsense. If a criminal could get into the palace, where could he hide? Hayne only shook his head slightly and slowly reminded them not to believe anything without solid evidence. Then, half joking, half serious, he looked at them and said, "What if the criminal in that article were actually me?" The four dismissed it as nonsense and assumed Hayne was joking. He could not possibly be a criminal. The next day, Hayne used the newspaper story as an assignment for the four princes. He sternly warned that such news must never be taken lightly, because if one day they became kings and ignored rumors like this, they could unintentionally put the whole country in danger. The task he set was, each of the four must go into the city or use their own method to investigate the incident reported in the paper. Kai was the first to speak. He wanted to directly meet the person who had written the article. However, upon examining it closely, the paper did not specify the author's name. Even so, Kai learned the identity of the one who had revised the draft, so he decided to meet that person to inquire further. By the end of the day, he returned with one important piece of information. The original author had resigned immediately after finishing that article, and at present no one knew his whereabouts. Licht still acted dismissive, believing the matter was not worth their concern. In contrast, Bruno found it extremely suspicious, so he was adamant that they had to track down the author. The next day, all four brothers searched everywhere, asking questions in many places, but still gained no results. Unexpectedly, it was Licht who discovered a clue. Excitedly, he revealed that the author had changed his name and had on occasion appeared at the city's Great Hall. Wasting no time, all four went there and lay in wait until he left. They quickly intercepted and captured him. Under harsh threats that if he did not speak the truth he would be eliminated, the man was forced to confess. He admitted that he had merely received an invitation from a mysterious figure. Because of the dim light, he could not clearly see that person's face, only remembered that the stranger asked him to write an article implying that before King Victor's enthronement, a criminal had once appeared at the Harvest Festival, and now that criminal had slipped into the palace. But when he went to investigate, he found no information at all, so he suspected it was fake news. The four brothers entered the palace archives and found records of criminals at the Harvest Festival. And then Bruno accidentally discovered Hain's name. He had been arrested on charges of kidnapping and attempted assassination of a prince. The incident had taken place before Victor ascended the throne, and that very prince had been Victor himself in his youth. Unwilling to accept the truth, the four brothers sat down to deliberate once more. At this point, they were nearly certain that the criminal mentioned in the article was none other than Hain. They recalled that from beginning to end, he had always been the one assigning them tasks, always cautioning them to investigate but never allow themselves to fall into danger. Thinking carefully, that was nothing less than a hint. The one they were searching for was actually him. For Hain would never push his beloved students into danger. Yet they still could not understand why their teacher had done such a thing. The four immediately rushed off to find Hain and demand answers, but when they reached his room he was nowhere to be found. Still confused, they discovered that Victor had returned to the palace. The four decided to meet their father to ask for the truth. However, when confronted, Victor firmly remained silent, unwilling to break the promise of long ago. Just as the atmosphere grew tense, Victor's assistant suddenly arrived with a letter left behind by Hain himself. Only then did Victor finally open his mouth and begin to tell his four sons the truth that had been hidden all this time. He recounted that in his younger days he often slipped out into the city to observe the daily lives of the common people. On one such excursion he had his pocket watch stolen by a thief. Following the trail in pursuit, Victor encountered a small, thin young man, and that was the fateful meeting. Hain had ordered 2 children to return the stolen item to Victor. Hain wanted Victor to go home, but instead he followed Hain to the place where the orphans stayed. Hain was responsible for leading the group and forbade them from committing crimes. Seeing Victor hungry, Hain gave him an apple, but Victor only took a bite before passing it to a nearby little girl. In the days that followed, Victor repeatedly snuck out of the palace to help Hain. He taught Hain ways to earn money to care for the children. Witnessing this reality, Victor pledged to himself that he would change the country when he ascended the throne. Hain gradually became Victor's only friend, and the only person to whom he could open his heart. At that time the Harvest Festival was drawing near, and wanting to help, Victor gave Hain his precious golden pocket watch in exchange for a cheap bottle of wine, as a way to provide Hain with money to care for the orphans under his protection. A few days later, the palace suddenly discovered that Victor had disappeared. The entire court panicked, immediately assuming the future king had been kidnapped, and at once deployed soldiers everywhere to search. Meanwhile, Victor and Hain were accidentally spotted. The soldiers, upon seeing them, misunderstood and assumed Hain was the kidnapper, so they gave chase. During the pursuit, Victor's golden pocket watch fell to the ground. That sight only reinforced the soldiers' conviction that Hain was the culprit who had abducted the prince. They all drew their guns, firing warning shots to force him to stop. Yet in that very moment of danger, Victor rushed forward, using his own body to shield Hain. Forced into a situation where collective punishment loomed, the soldiers, unwilling to bear responsibility, fabricated the claim that Hain was using Victor as a human shield to escape. That slander ignited Hain's fury, and he fiercely fought back. Only when Victor shouted loudly did Hain finally hesitate, and immediately after, he was bound and dragged into prison. During his days in jail, Hain neither resented nor tried to justify himself. He only prayed quietly, wishing for Victor's safety and peaceful return to the palace. Then, after Victor recovered, he personally came to the dungeon to free Hain. Once the truth became clear, Victor explained everything to his father, and Hain was fully pardoned. 1 year later, after Victor officially ascended the throne, as a gesture of gratitude, he had a church built where Hain could teach. From an orphan boy who had once been illiterate, Hain grew to become a respected teacher, admired by all as he was now. Even so, between Victor and Hain existed a secret pact. They decided never to reveal the truth of that year, for they knew it would only stir unnecessary disputes. And if the day came when the truth had to be exposed, Hain would leave the palace. Now that moment had arrived. Hain quietly left the palace and resigned from his post as royal tutor. He did not want the people to know that the future princes of the kingdom had been taught by one who once bore the status of a criminal. That was why he chose to depart, preserving the honor of the royal family as well as his own. Tomorrow would be the final lesson, so Victor instructed his sons to prepare thoroughly. That night, all 4 princes tossed and turned, unable to sleep. By the next morning, they went together to the classroom where Hain was already waiting. When they met him, the four recounted that Victor had explained the misunderstanding from long ago. Yet Hain did not want them to look at the matter purely with emotion. He sternly reminded them to try placing themselves in the position of a king and consider, if indeed a criminal had slipped into the palace, what would they do? Hearing this, Licht was the first to answer. He did not hesitate, saying directly that he would surely drive the criminal out. Hain nodded slightly, then explained further that his purpose in accepting the role of tutor had been to train all four to become worthy kings. A true king must never allow emotions to override reason when making decisions. He then turned to assess each one of them. To Leonhard, he admitted that though at times he was foolish, his strength lay in his ability to recognize his own flaws. Moreover, Leonhard possessed exceptional imagination and capability, traits that would help him become a good king in the future. As for Licht, Hain said he was humble, treated everyone equally, and always knew how to listen. If Licht one day ascended the throne, the country would become a place where no one suffered discrimination or prejudice. Next was Bruno, a man of great knowledge who never neglected his studies and could convey learning to others, with sound judgment and decision-making ability. When he became king, he would bring about a just nation. Finally came Kai, a man with a compassionate heart and the strength to overcome adversity. If he became king, he would use that strength to bring peace to all people. And with that, the final lesson came to an end. That afternoon, Hain officially left the palace. By evening, Victor entered the room to see his four sons. He immediately realized that each carried a heavy heart, none of them cheerful at the departure of their teacher. Victor sighed softly, then informed them that a new tutor, recommended by Count Rosen, would soon arrive to take Hain's place. He only hoped the four princes could get along with the newcomer and continue their studies. Yet all four immediately opposed. In their eyes, aside from Hain, no one could ever be worthy of that role. Thus, upon learning that the council had not yet reached a final decision on the appointment, they discussed together and firmly resolved to present their opinion before the council themselves. Their goal was not only to defend Hain, but also to prove that he was truly the perfect choice for the position of royal tutor. They understood clearly that a royal tutor was not merely a teacher of words and knowledge, but also one who guided the princes step by step toward maturity, worthy of the throne. Therefore, if all four could prove before the council that they had truly changed, matured, and advanced under Hain's guidance, then the council would have to acknowledge it and agree to let him remain. Together, they prepared a presentation persuasive enough to win the council's ear. Victor, too, was pleased that his sons made such an effort. Meanwhile, Hain had returned to the church. Victor went to see him, greeted him, and informed him that this afternoon there would be a meeting to select the new tutor, and that the four princes were plotting something. Hain wanted Victor to stop them, to keep them from doing anything foolish. But Victor refused, saying that if Hain wished, he could attend the meeting and see for himself. At that very moment, Rosen stood up to nominate another candidate for the tutor position. That person quickly gained support from many council members, and they even considered appointing him on the spot. Yet unexpectedly, the four princes appeared. By law, they had no right to directly nominate a teacher, only to recommend one. The final decision still belonged to the council. Even so, they firmly voiced their wish. They wanted Hain back. Rosen immediately struck back, exposing Hain's dark past, claiming he had once been a criminal, and further pointing out that he held no official qualifications. This only fueled the discontent of many council members. However, the four princes did not falter. One by one, they rebutted, affirming that everyone makes mistakes in the past, but what truly matters is how they rise and change. They emphasized that this time, they were no longer thinking as naive children, but as heirs to the throne. That was why they did not want a wrong decision today to lead to grave consequences for the kingdom in the future. Finally, all four invoked Hain's final lesson, that a king must never allow emotions to override reason, and must always aim toward building a strong nation. They declared that only thanks to Hain had they truly understood and realized this, and that only Hain was qualified to guide them on the correct path to becoming worthy kings. Their speech was praised and applauded by the crown prince. From above, Hain heard every word of the four princes, and he could not help but be moved. All that he had planted over the years had at last borne fruit. The four once immature pupils could now stand before the council and speak with the composure of true heirs. When the session adjourned briefly, Victor stepped outside and unexpectedly ran into his eldest son along with Count Rosen. The Crown Prince could not hide his astonishment upon learning how quickly his younger brothers had matured. At that moment, Victor was summoned back inside to participate in the vote. Before leaving, the Crown Prince spoke out directly, forbidding Rosen from interfering any further. He wished to compete fairly with his younger brothers, not relying on Rosen's schemes. The following day, the final decision was announced. The royal tutors stepped into the familiar classroom. When they saw that it was Hain, the four princes sprang to their feet at once, faces radiant, cheering in welcome. They were overwhelmed with joy to greet their teacher's return.